This is Tips for Travelers. Inspiration, advice, and tips on finding and having amazing travel experiences on both land and at sea. Get more tips on must-see and must-do travel at tipsfortravelers.com.
Hello and welcome to the Best of Florida Live. Over the course of this podcast, I'm going to be bringing you various excerpts of things I recorded over the course of 10 days while I was on a tour which is called the Best of Florida. And it's actually a Titan Travel tour, and I traveled as a guest of Titan Travel, and I will be giving you my thoughts, my views. I'll be sharing the experiences. I'll be telling you what's good about it. I'll be telling you what's okay about it. I'll be telling you the downsides of it, and trying to give you a really sort of balanced view of what it's like to go on an escorted tour around Florida with Titan Travel.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Florida. Welcome to Orlando. Welcome to the tour. My name is Debbie, as I'm sure you're well aware now, and your driver's name is Carlos. He will be with us all the way. But you know what? Let's get you to the hotel. It's 20 minutes away. It's a beautiful hotel, the Shingle Creek. Shingle Creek set out a bit. We've arrived in at Orlando International Airport. Orlando is served by two airports. Sanford is over about an hour away. International Drive is about a $7 to $10 ride away in a cab if you want to go to International Drive. That is, International Drive, basically, for people that don't know, is kind of where it's happening in Orlando. Orlando itself is a wonderful downtown area that I'll talk about tomorrow or the next day, but not today as we're arriving. But basically, you're not far from International Drive.
It's as I record this, it's the very first day. It's the day of arrival. It's just after 8 o'clock in the evening. I'm sitting just with the sun going down, overlooking a rather beautiful golf courses. There's water everywhere, and it's rather pretty actually. And it's actually at the Shingle Creek Hotel. It is, of course, 1 o'clock in the morning, my sort of body clock time. And so if I do sound a little bit dazed and whatever, that's because I've been traveling all day. So let me sort of dial back and tell you a little bit about what this actual tour is. So it's called the Best of Florida. And the idea is it goes around exploring Florida and all the different aspects of Florida. And what I'm particularly interested in is, I think the thing that really struck me about the tour is I think it gives a sense of Florida being more than just beaches and theme parks. And the tour does go, it doesn't spend any time in the theme parks, although I'm actually going to be staying on at the end of the tour to do the theme parks, which of course is an option for people to do. You can either stay early or stay at the end. I'm staying at the end. And we do have some beach time. But it tries to show you that Florida is much more than just beaches and theme parks. So we're going to be going to see some history in St. Augustine, which apparently is the oldest town in the United States. We're going to be seeing some science and exploration by going to the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. We're going to see probably one of the most modern and eclectic cities in the United States, which is Miami, which is the biggest cruise port in the world, famous, of course, for the Art Deco sector and also for its Latin culture. We're going to see a lot of very beautiful scenic nature by going down the Keys to Key West. We're going to see wildlife in the Everglades. We're going to see some heritage and some sort of stately home heritage when we go to Cape Coral and visit Edison and Ford's winter homes. And then we go to the Clearwater area for beaches, apparently some of the most beautiful beaches there are. And of course, as we go through the next couple of days, I will tell you more about that. So the other thing I'm going to be exploring, and during the course of this series, Best of Florida Live, is take a look at the whole process of going on an escorted tour and seeing what is good about it, what's maybe even bad about it, and who I really think escorted tour is for. And what I'm kind of interested in is I'm probably like many people have a view of what escorted tours are, and I'm interested to see if that's true, and to see whether it's very rigid, or whether there's lots of flexibility in it, or whether it's actually restricting in any way, or if it's a great way to see a place like Florida that you've never been to. One of the things that struck me so far is it's definitely, most definitely for people who want to feel looked after, want to feel that everything's under control, and they don't want to take a lot of risk in reality, because the great thing about this tour so far has been from the minute you step out your door, there's someone there to guide you and help you. So the way that it works with Titan is included in the trip is a VIP pickup. So you're picked up from home by somebody, and in fact I was picked up by it's actually a beautiful new car, branded, etc., Titan VIP service, and it picks you up. Took me to Gatwick, which was because it was relatively early in the morning, it was only an hour's drive, but for me it's about normally about an hour and a half to 2 hours drive. So you have you're taken there, you get dropped off. There's some Titan representatives right there to meet you, and somebody then takes your bags and escorted me all the way to the check-in area. At the check-in area there was another Titan representative that welcomed me, checked me in, told me the name of the tour manager, who, what I hadn't actually appreciated, the tour manager on this tour is also flying with the group. So they're UK based, so they fly with the group, and they're not a locally based person, which I just assumed they'd been a locally based person. So they, again, there's somebody who also understands the traveller, etc., and is on the same flight. Anyway, so I checked in, and once I went down to the gate, Debbie, who's the very enthusiastic and very friendly tour host, she was there to meet everybody as they came down with a big sign. She gave us a welcoming letter which explained the arrangements when we got to Orlando. It's a massive big airport, and it's a slightly unusual thing which I'll talk about later, but basically explained what she was going to be on the flight, where to meet her, and how to pick up your bags, etc. And then once we arrived we did our own immigration and customs as you would expect, fetched our bags. We then actually had to, at Orlando Airport, we then, I guess we landed in a sort of a little satellite. You then catch a train across to the main terminal, and you pick up your bags again if you want to, or you can take your bags on the train. I'm not sure if I explained that very well, but basically what happens is you can either just take your own bags with you on the train, or you can hand them in, and they are then taken to the terminal, so you don't have to worry about taking them. So again, the point that, and in fact Debbie also stressed this, is for people who are perhaps not as mobile as on their feet, or they've got particularly big bags, or they just don't want to, again, you're helped at Orlando because someone will take your bags. You then do have to take your own bags basically once you get to the bus. Then the bus driver very kindly loads your bags on the bus, etc., etc. So as you can see, right through the whole process, there's a lot of care, a lot of attention, and Debbie's with you the whole time. And over the course of the next couple of series, I'll talk a little bit more about what Debbie as the manager does. So that's basically where we've got to so far. So it's really just kind of the setup and where we are. They fly with British Airways, so everybody on the tour, it's quite a big group actually, and Debbie was telling me it is a particularly big group. There's 44 people on our group, but the groups can vary anything from 11 people up to, I guess, 44 or so. It doesn't feel a particularly big group, but of course I'll let you know a little bit about that as we explore over the next couple of days. So let me just finish off the segment for today talking a little bit about the hotel and the arrivals at the hotel. So we all boarded the bus. We actually then had to wait for sort of the last lot of baggage, the last lot of people to come through. So of course that clearly is one of the downsides, if you like, of going on a tour, as everybody knows, is your pace is always set by the last person. And there was a bit of a hold up with some people's bags, so it took us a bit of a while to get through, but Debbie was very good at sort of keeping everyone briefed, letting know what was going on. But we finally got to the hotel. We only got to the hotel, so we landed about 3:30 or so. We got to the hotel, I think it was probably around about 6 o'clock or so. It was only about 20 minutes ride, so there's a bit of hanging around at the airport, waiting for everybody and collecting everyone together. We're staying at, the first hotel we're staying at is the Shingle Creek Hotel. It's a massive big hotel. It's a very conference type of hotel. It's got this big golf course, which I'm currently looking out over. It's got a lot of restaurants. The rooms are huge, big, spacious rooms. very friendly. I actually had some Mexican food tonight. It was great. And we're here for 2 nights. And one of the things that we will see on this tour is I think we stay all together in about 4 or 5 hotels during the course of the tour. It's a pretty intensive tour. And we have an early start tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is probably not a bad thing, since I'm sure that with jet lag, normally, as we know, we all wake up at 4 o'clock or so in the morning. So far, just to sort of summarize what I've learned so far in terms of pros of the escorted tour, it's definitely, it's about keeping, hand-holding is probably a too strong a word, but it definitely, you're hosted, you're caretaken after, you're looked after. It struck me actually that it's particularly good for solo travelers if people want company, if people want to feel they've got a friendly face always. And I'm not sure exactly, it's hard to tell on the bus at the moment as we settle in, but I think there's probably also a couple of solo travelers. I'm on this traveling by myself. The downside is, with all tours, is you go by the pace of the last person. So that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow we're off to St. Augustine, and I will tell you more about that in the next post. And so now it's about 9:25 on the second evening, and it's time for me to update you about day 2, what we did on the day, what we got up to, and also some more things that I've observed and learned about escorted touring, what it is and what it isn't. So the day was spent focused on St. Augustine, and St. Augustine is, as I've been billing it, the oldest town in the United States. The definition I read somewhere in some of the material that I picked up, which is, I guess, probably more correct, which basically says that it's the place or the town or the area that has been, continuously occupied by humans for the longest time. But basically, it's the oldest town in the United States, and it's a very popular tourist resort because it has a mixture of history, and it has a mixture of lots of attractions for tourists. It's very touristy overall. So maybe I'll talk a little bit more detail about that in a second. I'll just sort of step back a little bit and tell you a little bit more about some observations in terms of the whole approach towards escorted touring and Orlando more generally. So one of the things I don't think I mentioned yesterday is coming into Orlando, it reminded me as I flew in just how distinctive the whole of Florida looks. And I guess we'll see that as we travel around a bit. There's huge amounts of water. It's hot and it's tropical. And so there's water everywhere. In fact, large parts of it used to be sort of marshy land, which has ended up being sort of reclaimed. But you still have, certainly in this part of Florida, you have, wherever you drive, you see water and sort of trenches of water. It's very green because of the humidity and the heat and the water and the rain. It does feel very spacious, and it does have a real sense of being Florida, if you like, and just being very distinctive. So that was the observation as I came in, and certainly so far on the tour, that's just reminded me about the sense of what Florida looks like. One of the things that I have also learned in regard to escorted tours is there's a certain amount of hand-holding, there's a certain amount of guidance, but there's actually much more free time than I've experienced on some other similar kind of things, like on river tours. So on river tours I've been on, they are very organized. Almost every minute of the day is scheduled, and there's something in place that you kind of expected to do, if that's the right way to put it, because of course you can always not do things. On escorted tours it's slightly different, certainly in the way it's been so far, is there is definitely someone taking care of you. As I mentioned, we have the tour manager. Things are always explained. You're always kind of directed in the right way. You're always helped out. But actually there's quite a lot of free time. So obviously meals, as I've already mentioned, they're all taken at your own time, and you pay for yourself. Also, once we got to St. Augustine, basically we had 4 hours to do as we wanted to do, and we got back to Orlando around about 4:30, and again it was a free evening with nothing really organized. So there is much more free time to be able to do things that you want, but there's always a sense of someone being there, and things are always explained, where you can go and eat, or how things work. Even simple things like explaining us that the hotel has Wi-Fi, the bus has Wi-Fi. So things like that are always pointed out. So there's a real sense of kind of caretaking. The other thing, which I'm not sure if I mentioned before, but when we arrived, our bags were brought to the room, and what we were told for tomorrow morning, because we were leaving this hotel, is you leave the bags by our door by 7 a.m. and someone will come and collect all the bags. It's one bag per person is collected. Those gratuities are covered again, and it's taken to the coach. So things like that are taken out of the whole process. Obviously, if you're traveling by yourself, you'd be doing this yourself, or you'd be having to call up the bellboys and paying tips, etc. But I do think, though, from also what I've observed, though, is overall the type of people that like the tourists and like escorted tours are people, I'm guessing, who are relatively cautious. They don't want to make a lot of decisions. They want to know that everything's sorted. They want familiarity. And that's certainly my impression. So, for example, when we got to St. Augustine, there was an option to go on a trolley tour. It was one of the optional tours. And actually all around St. Augustine are these trolley tours that go around. You could quite easily have just done it yourself because there's so many of them. Maybe people didn't know that, I guess. I didn't know that, of course, until I arrived, went to saw them all driving around and went to the visitor centre and you saw a lot of them around. But the option was given of going on a trolley tour. And of the 44 people, I think there was only 6 or 7 people said they weren't going to do it. But most people kind of, because it was there, because it was an option, everyone said, right, let's go and do it. And that was about a 70-minute tour or so, and it cost about $25, so not a lot. But I get the sense that people are relatively cautious. They want to be clear about everything works. They don't want to have to feel they're kind of exposed in an unfamiliar country. That's certainly my impression of the kind of people that certainly would appeal to, and certainly people that who on the tour seem very comfortable with that. And of course, that may evolve over the course of the day, but they certainly stick to the plan. They're always early for the bus so far. People have been really early for the bus. Like this morning, you're almost there early. And returning from St. Augustine, I got back to the bus. I thought I was early, 10 minutes before we were due to go, and everyone was on board. I was the last person back. People were all kind of, obeying the rules. That was my impression. So let me talk a little bit then about the whole day. So we spent about 4.5 hours on the bus. It was about 2.5 hours going there because the traffic was bad getting out of town. It took us much less time coming back. And so St. Augustine is quite far north, and it was quite a long trip. It's a very historic town, as I mentioned. It dates right back, it was originally in the 1500s when the Spanish first explored it, but it really got established in 1565 when it was properly established by a man called Pedro Mendez. And then over the years there was, it developed and it grew. There was lots of struggles between the Spanish and the English. Pirates even attacked St. Augustine. And so what the Spanish did is they built this actually magnificent fortress, which is called Castillo de San Marcos. It began in building in 1672. It took a long time to build. It was only finished in 1695. It's a magnificent fortress, really interesting to go around. For me, it was a really big highlight to go and walk all around it and read all the stories and the history of the sieges that happened. The English actually held a siege of St. Augustine, and everybody, I think it was the population went into the fortress, 1,500 people, and they basically held out against the siege. So this really interesting, fascinating fortress right against on the Mantas Bay, really magnificent. But the rest of the town is also very interesting. St. George's Street is a pedestrianised street with lots of quaint old buildings, lots of restaurants, gift shops, as you would expect, sort of craft shops. And then there's a couple of very magnificent buildings in the town, one of which is now called Flagler's College. And Flagler's College was actually originally a hotel built by Henry Flagler in 1888 called the Ponce de Leon. It was a big luxury hotel. And basically what happened is he had really developed tourism in the area, loved the area and developed lots of tourism and built this beautiful luxury hotel, which is now a college named after him. Across the road from that is another very beautiful building, which is now the Town Hall and the Leitner Museum. And that's the museum now has lots of decorative art. And it was originally the Alcazar Hotel, also built by Flagler in the 1880s, so another of the magnificent hotels. But these are absolutely beautiful buildings, and if you want to see what they look like, if you either look on my Instagram or if you go to the site tipsfortravellers.com, and if you search for the St. Augustine, and you'll find some of the pictures and things there. And also I've done some video of St. Augustine because it's a very beautiful place, but it's very quaint. There's things like the oldest schoolhouse, the oldest house, a little bit out of town. There's the Fountain of Youth, which has a long story around it about supposedly how it was the Fountain of Youth. Of course, it wasn't. But it's become, because it's so busy from a tourist perspective, there's also lots of very touristy things around. So you've got Ripley's Believe It or Not, you have the Potter's Wax Museum, you have like a pirate-focused activity centre, lots of hotels, zillions amounts of restaurants, fudge shops, ice cream shops, etc., etc., etc. And one of my observations is overall it feels pretty authentic. Parts of it do feel a bit, and this is probably the wrong word for it, but I've called it Disney-like. It feels a little bit created. Sometimes, parts of it just feel a bit like it's been recreated, but there is a long history here. Lots and lots of school parties, lots of school kids around. Very interesting town. So basically what happened is on the journey there, what Debbie did is she first of all told a little bit about what Florida's like. And this is, again, come back to my point about one of the things that they do on escorted tours is make sure that you have one guide that's with you the whole time and keeps building the stories. So on the trip, she told stories about Florida, and then she told little snippets about Orlando, and she said, oh, she'll be following up that more tomorrow, then told us quite a lot about St. Augustine. But what I thought might be interesting is just to hear a little bit about what she actually had to say about Florida, so you can get a sense of the kind of coverage and the sort of things that we were told on the tour. And so certainly if you're coming on a tour, an escorted tour, it's pretty good because you don't have to do lots of research, you don't have to do lots of reading up, because basically you arrive and the guide will tell you pretty much everything you need to know. And because you're spending quite a lot of time on the coach, there's also time to do it. And it's also very clear from the way that she told it is, it's clearly been, some of it's been pre-written, some of it's obviously from, is a bit ad hoc based on what we see, but it's very well sort of researched and practiced and clear about what we're going to be told. But you don't have to read guidebooks, you don't have to research it, you just have to trust that everything that you need to know will be told to you. And also, whenever you arrive in a place, you're given maps. So we were given a map of the whole journey, the whole of Florida. Then when we got off in St. Augustine, we were given a map. And I'm sure that everywhere we go, we're going to be given maps, pointed in the right direction, and constantly given information. Again, you don't need to bring guidebooks, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So let's take a listen as an example of the sort of things that we were told about Florida.
Much of Florida is actually peninsula between the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean and the Straits of Florida. Basically, Florida is split into two divides in climates. You've got the north, which we're in now, Pensacola, Jacksonville, Tallahassee being the capital, St. Augustine, Daytona Beach, Orlando, Space Coast, Jupiter and Sebastian on the Space Boat Coast as far as Vero Beach is the north. Then we've got the south, which is Latin American, you can subtropical. You've got the gateway to Latin America, which is Miami, and it's from West Palm Beach down to Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, down the Keys and Key West. and that's all subtropical, so you have even different climates here. Key West is the southernmost point of the USA and is only 90 miles from Havana. It's actually nearer to Cuba than to Miami.
And so day 3 is now finished, and it's a day spent half a day at the Kennedy Space Center and half a day traveling from the Kennedy Space Center down to Hollywood in Florida. And one of the things that's important to note about these kinds of tours is there is a lot of travel time. So pretty much so far, we've had half a day somewhere and half a day getting somewhere. And that's what today was, and that's probably what the next day is going to be like. And I think the next day, and then towards the end of the tour, we actually sort of sit tight and relax in one place overall. So today felt like quite a long day. It was quite a tiring day. We started off at 7 o'clock in the morning. We had our bags collected, and then at 8 o'clock we set off. We were at Kennedy for 5 hours, and what was great is we spent 5 hours, we had 5 hours to ourselves. So what happened is when we arrived, we were given our tickets. We went through, Debbie escorted those people through to the Atlantis exhibition because she recommended people go and see that first thing before the crowds built up. I decided, because I'd been there not that long ago, in fact about 2-3 months ago, that I was going to do things in a slightly different order, but people went there. So again, that's what we saw is the tour manager made sure that everybody understood what there was to see, what was included, and the best way of doing it. She gave instructions and tips and suggestions on how people get the most of their time there, and then left everyone to get on with their own stuff. And that was one of the things I hadn't quite expected in an escort tour, is that you would have as much time when you got to a place to then just do what you wanted to do in that place. So we spent from about 9 o'clock, just after 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock at Kennedy Space Center, which was magnificent. It really was fantastic. I love Kennedy Space Center. As I mentioned, I've been there now twice in the space of about 2 or 3 months, and I could have just spent another whole day there. There's so much to see, and it's very well done. I have a whole podcast about the Kennedy Space Center and how to get the most of it, and I'll put links to that in the show notes. But I spent time going around the Rocket Garden, the Atlantis again, which is just magnificent. You see it up close. Some of the IMAX shows, just really brilliant. But I won't spend a lot of time talking about Kennedy Space Center in detail, other than a couple of thoughts just to leave it, as I came away with, is the point being that, and they make this in one of the talks with Rocket Garden, is that when we first sent men into space, basically there were ballistic missiles with tiny little capsules on top, which sent people into space, and they were missiles. It wasn't until really they set the challenge of going to the moon by President Kennedy that they had to think about things differently and start to really develop rockets very specifically, and they were developed for the Apollo mission, and also they later developed for the space shuttle. Now the space shuttles has withdrawn, commercial operators are now in charge of servicing the space station. At the moment, the only way they can get American astronauts, to the space station is by the Russians. And it costs about $80 million per astronaut to send them up to the space station. And so what's happening is commercial operators are going to be moving in and ultimately replenishing the space station and sending astronauts there. So you've got companies on the NASA grounds like SpaceX and Boeing, developing rockets, developing systems that can actually service the needs of things like taking satellites up and taking astronauts up. And what NASA now focusing on is trying to get much further afield and ultimately to Mars with the SLS program. And that's the big new thing that NASA are working on, with the goal of how do you take men into space for much longer periods than ever before on deeper and much deeper missions. And that's very interesting, and they spend quite a lot of time on all the various aspects at NASA talking about that mission as well as looking backwards. Every single manned space flight that has been sent up by the US has gone from basically Kennedy Space Center and their environment. So you see all of the launch pads where any person who's been sent into space has gone from, and that's very, very exciting. So in terms of the rest of the day, we then left at 2 o'clock and we only got to the hotel about 6:15. It was torrential rains. We were very lucky. Florida we often think of as being bright and sunny. It's called the Sunshine State. But of course, it also has hurricanes. The hurricane season runs from June to November. And the time that I was there was just before the hurricane season. But of course, it gets a lot of rain as well. That's just why it's so lush and so green. Absolutely torrential rains belted down as we travelled down a couple of hundred miles. It's almost 300 miles, I think, when I looked in the map, down from Cape Canaveral down to Hollywood. So basically, we arrived at the hotel, checked in, settled into the Crown Plaza Hotel, which is a very nice hotel. I've done a video tour of that as well. And then tomorrow we have a luxury because we're only getting up and heading off at 8:30. So a couple of things, observations. Again, just to remind you, the thing that was reinforced on escorted tours was, everything is kind of included, everything is guided, but when you get to a place, you're given time to then go and explore. That's what certainly has been the experience so far, and that was kind of different to what I expected. I expected we were going to be literally escorted all the time. As you are on river cruise, when you go on the excursions are all, detailed excursions where you've got a guide who takes you on everything.
We hope to get into your hotel for about 4:30, 5 o'clock-ish. So that's a nice-ish time. Try our best. There's only one road in and one road out of Key West, so we're very much governed by the traffic, US Highway number 1. And then we have a great view of the Intracoastal Waterway there. We're gonna get on the I-95 into Miami, and we'll go along to Miami Beach. There's 2 parts to Miami. You've got we're in actually Miami-Dade. It's huge. It encompasses the downtown area of Miami, but we're headed for Miami Beach.
And so now here I am at the end of another day, heading into evening number 4. And if you can hear noise in the background, it's actually the air conditioning in the hotel. And one of the things that I'd read about on TripAdvisor is people talking about how in the DoubleTree in Key West, the air conditioning is very loud, and it does seem a bit loud. The official name of the hotel, the full name of the hotel, is the DoubleTree by Hilton Grand Key Resort, which is a very long name. It sounds very grand, and it's not a particularly grand hotel, although as I spend a bit more time here, I'm probably warming to it more, but I'll come back to that in a short while. So, as I mentioned, this was day 4, and day 4 involved traveling to Miami, which was only about an hour's trip away from Hollywood, where we spent the night at the Crowne Plaza. And then it was on to Key West. So Hollywood, I spoke about a little bit yesterday. We didn't really get a chance to see very much of it, but clearly it was very touristy. Lots of new condominiums going up, lots of what I think are probably holiday apartments going up, and clearly a very big popular holiday resort. That was my kind of impression, but we didn't get much time to see it. So the schedule for the day was another busy schedule. 7:30 we had to leave our bags by a door, which were collected. Again, that's a great thing, just leaving your bags by the door and being collected. The guy who came to collect mine actually came just before 7:30, but I was ready for him. And then we were due to depart at 8:30, and as usual everybody was on time and early and enthusiastic, and we departed and headed into Miami. There was quite a bit of traffic, as you'd expect at that time in the morning, and as we drove to Miami, Debbie told us a little bit about Miami, some of the history of Miami, and I'll probably play that in a short bit so you can just hear a little bit of the morning setup and what she had to say. So as I said, we got there sort of about 9:30 or so, and we did a brief drive around. We just went pretty much straight to Miami South Beach, a little bit of a drive around, saw the Holocaust Memorial, which is quite a remarkable thing. If for those of you who've never seen it, it's this hand and sort of from the wrist down to about the wrist, pushing out of the ground with sort of bodies and people clinging to it, and then it comes out of this area which is surrounded by water, but then there's a dry bit around it, a wall which has all the names of people. I guess from the area or relatives there. I'm not exactly sure what their connection to Miami is. I should have asked that question, but I'm not 100% sure. But there's lots of names within there which I assume have some connection to families in Miami or people from the area or something, some connection with the area. We then had 2 hours. So by the time we actually got and drove down Ocean Drive, so we drove down Ocean Drive very slowly, which is the Art Deco area, so everyone could have a look. We then were dropped off on 5th Street, and we got off at around about 10 o'clock by this stage, and we had 2 hours to ourselves to then explore. And Debbie told a little bit of the history of South Beach, and as we went down South Beach, pointed out a couple of the buildings. And one of the things that was also very interesting, a little bit of reading myself, which I sort of had known, but I just went and reread it, because that whole area in Miami used to be, between the sort of 60s and the 80s, went into real decline, and it was quite run down, and the buildings were shabby. And apparently just sort of between the 60s and sometime in the 80s, lots of pensioners started moving there, and then it became sort of a lot of drug dealers, quite druggy, quite a few Cubans, Cubans who'd obviously fled from Cuba. But generally that was quite run down. And then towards the early 80s, into the 70s, into the 80s, a lady and a sort of got people really motivated to preserve this area, because there was a sense that it was going to start being destroyed, and actually there was some phenomenal Art Deco architecture. So it was eventually recognized as an area of historical significance, and then it really started to boom. And this has probably helped, or maybe not helped, I'm not sure, by the TV show Miami Vice. Miami Vice used the whole South Beach area during the TV show as sort of inspiration, actually locations for many of their episodes about sort of thugs and drug gangs and that kind of stuff and whatnot. So that probably also helped draw attention to that whole area. Of course, now it's very trendy, it's very hip, it's quite expensive. There's very shishy bars and restaurants and hotels and things. But I really like South Beach. It's very beautiful, and you have the sort of park area between that and the sea. Again, and I guess maybe because the weather's quite good, there's a lot of hobos or homeless people. I'm not quite sure what the right terminology is, but quite a few of them hanging around that whole area, I guess because the weather's good, and sort of shouting things at you and whatnot. But I mean, relatively not that hassly, but the odd people do. But that's just part of the whole South Beach. So on one side of the road, you've got this very shishy part. On the other side, you've sort of got all the homeless people, mostly men actually. I didn't see that many women homeless people hanging around there. Anyway, so we had 2 hours to ourselves, and I spent some time strolling up and down doing some video, so I could do a video tour, so you'll be able to take a look at that. So I'll put links to that in the show notes, and obviously you can search the blog or my YouTube channel for Miami South Beach. So that was 2 hours on the ground there. We then set off at 12 o'clock from Miami. Everyone, of course, was on time, as usual, and we ended up stopping at about 1:30 for a break, and eventually got to Key West around 4:15. So again, it was another day with lots of time on the coach. So we spent about 5 hours, probably a bit more than 5 hours on the coach, and 2 hours sightseeing. So again, it was another day where most of the day was actually spent on the coach. And again, this is the thing that's I really hadn't really appreciated about escorting tours, and really thinking about, it's a big place we're coming to, and the places we're seeing are quite spread out. So there's quite a lot of time on the coach. Debbie makes it go really quickly because she tells lots of anecdotes and she tells lots of history and stories about the place and what you're seeing. So for example, the whole way down the Keys, she was pointing out various sites. She told the history of the different keys, how it was developed, and some of the history of the original railway, the 7 Mile Railway, which is now, or the 7 Mile Bridge that we drove down and the railway. But time goes quickly because there's lots of that information going on. So one of the thoughts that struck me again about escorted touring, and I hadn't really thought about it, not having done one before and not really sort of digesting the itinerary that much, but it's not much of a holiday. It's very busy. There's quite a lot of time, particularly on this itinerary, in terms of getting to places, all the sort of the highlights along the way. So it's really about seeing as much as you can, and it's probably seeing as many highlights as you can in the time that you've got. So in those 10 days, the objective is to try and pack in as many highlights as possible, and most of the highlights are chosen to be in a particular place. That's certainly this itinerary. So it's about getting to a place, seeing somewhere, but at the moment it's been roughly half the day or so is getting there, and around roughly half the day is seeing places as such. Now I guess of course traveling down something like the Keys, you're seeing the Keys, and the only way you can see the Keys is by driving down it. So I'm probably being quite I'm assuming that all the traveling time is not viewing time, but if you see what I mean, it's quite an intensive holiday. So that's why I call it's not a holiday. It's not a resting holiday. It's very tiring in some ways, because you're traveling a lot, you're then seeing a lot, and then you're moving on. So we are actually in this hotel now for 2 nights, but in reality we've got here in the evening. We'll have a full day tomorrow with half a day of sightseeing, half a day of free time, thing in the evening, and then we're off again early in the morning to the next place. So it's really about people who want to see highlights in a region. And I'm guessing some itineraries on escort tour will be a smaller part of the region, but it's people who want to see as many highlights. They want to see as much as they can, as quickly as they can, and as in depth. So the being in depth is in some ways less important. It's about just getting to see as much as they possibly can within the time allowed, so that every minute of the day is used doing something, either getting there or seeing something. It's not about lolling around and relaxing. The other thing which is also interesting about this type of itinerary is about packing and about living out of a suitcase, because we are staying in so many hotels, you don't really have time to unpack. I haven't actually unpacked anything in my case. So the key thing, I think, is you need to be very clear and have a system with how you pack, which is thinking about how many clothes you need, because you're not going to have time to do laundry, etc. So you clothes for the whole trip, and then get a system going where you can pretty much operate out of your suitcase. So you're rotating clothes around, putting dirty clothes in the bottom, the top, whatever, and then you have to become quite nimble at using your suitcase as your wardrobe, as it were, because if you unpacked every night, you'd be wasting a lot of time. So that's quite an interesting tip around. I'm sure there's a whole process that and probably whole set of tips and advice. The other thing which I learned on this trip is it rains in Florida, and I should have brought an umbrella and rain gear. That's one of the things I didn't do. It's called the Sunshine State, and I didn't really think about it, and came ready for sunshine and didn't come ready for rain. And interestingly, quite a few people on the coach did, so maybe they're better informed than I am, but that's one of the tips, I guess, is make sure you really understand just what the weather's going to be and don't assume anything. The other thing that I mentioned it, I think, already is about hotels. Now, one of the things with the hotels is obviously, and again, different on different types of escorted tours, but I guess in putting together a package like this, you're trying to pitch a price that appeals to the type of people you're trying to appeal to. And one of the things that we have stayed in is all the hotels that we've stayed in have not been central. So the Rose and Shingle Creek wasn't central, the Hollywood Crown Plaza wasn't central, and it's Doubletree by Hilton Grand Key Resort in Key West is not central. It's actually right on one side of the island. Now they do have a shuttle bus which is very busy. They have that runs every hour and returns on the 20 past the hour. Loads of people, certainly in the evening ones, loads and loads of people. So actually they had 2 buses coming and they were both full, which also struck me as slightly strange, because if they have 2 buses, wouldn't it be easier to have them every half an hour, to have everyone congregating for an hour? But anyway, I'm sure there's a reason that they do it every hour and have 2 buses instead of every half an hour, but or even more frequent, it's 20 minutes. It'll be interesting to see. I decided eventually, because there were so many people and the buses were full at the time I wanted to go, I didn't go on the shuttle bus and ended up then staying at the hotel, which is kind of crazy because it would have been good to go down, but it was pretty packed and pretty busy. So the hotels are out of the centre, and I guess that's a function of getting the right price, etc. But it does mean that in the evenings it's not very easy to do things. In all the places you would have had to make a really conscious effort to get out, either through taxis or whatever. So that's also important, I think, as a tip when you're looking at the itinerary and you're understanding that you have evenings on your own and meals to do on your own, is really understanding where the hotels are and either budgeting for taxis or making sure about how you're going to get around and do things, so you don't end up doing, which is actually a little bit what I've done so far, but I won't do for the rest of the trip, is end up eating in the hotel, because that's what it is. And I think that's a good tip to learn, is just better understanding the nature of the hotels and the location. So far we've seen quite a lot, we've done quite a lot, and tomorrow we're going to actually get in to see Key West. Again, what's good about this tour is half the day is going to be something organized. We then have half a day of free time to do whatever we want. So again, that's that nice rhythm of things included and free time. And again, that's, and I said it quite a few times, is also for me a revelation about escorted touring. But also maybe it's also a point about making sure that you understand the itinerary when you book an escorted tour. If you want free time, you need to make sure that you've got one that has free time and it's not a back-to-back every minute of the day is organized for you. But if you want that, then that's what you've got to do. So that's really a summary of the day today, and then tomorrow it's our Key West day.
Now don't forget the sunset, whatever you do. If you don't catch it tonight, you catch it tomorrow night. I would say go for both nights myself. It's fun, it's buzzing, it's different, it's just great. And that'll be in Mallory Square. When you get onto the shuttles tonight, when you go, you'll see more of Key West. As we go in, you're just seeing the outskirts, so don't be disappointed. When the shuttle takes you in, you'll be there amongst the old town, all the hub. Lots of cruise liners come into Key West as well, folks. They don't usually stay overnight, but they will be in the mornings, and they stay the day, and it gets really busy. And they all frequent the bars, and you hear all the music coming out. It's a fun place.
And so day 5 was spent in Key West, and we started the day with the Conch Tour, and we headed out on a hour-long tour of Key West and had some of the highlights pointed out. It was actually completely torrential rain during the tour, so we donned these plastic ponchos, which with all the branding, Conch Tour branding on, and headed out. And so unfortunately I didn't get many pictures and things because it was lashing down. I mean, the good news about it, as the driver pointed out, was it's very unusual for it to be like that in Key West. It's normally bright and sunny and the streets are full of people and cars and whatnot, and that wasn't the case. We zooted around, I suspect, much quicker than we normally did. The rain eventually stopped about an hour and a half after we finished the tour, and then it became sort of very hot and muggy, etc. So day 5, Key West, it was all spent in Key West and the night again spent in Key West. And before I talk more about Key West, I had a bit of a revelation last night, an incident last night, which also made me understand another good benefit of coming on an escorted tour is the tour guide. And at the moment I've focused on the tour guide in terms on some of the other sort of pluses I'd said, or pros of an escorted tour. You've got one person telling you the story, building all the information, etc., and obviously being like the rallying person. And also what's very important is with the tour guide, everybody has one point of contact if they have any issues, if they have any problems, if they have any questions, and you have that person. Of course, if you're traveling by yourself, you don't have that, and you almost have someone that you can offload a problem on or get to resolve your problem with. And last night it was kind of a silly thing, but I thought might have lost my wallet because I'd had my wallet in my jacket, like a zippy top jacket, and I was fairly sure that I'd left it on the bus. But when I got off the bus, I remembered sort of checking my seat and stuff, and thinking I picked up everything. And just as it was quite late at night, it was probably about 8:45 at night, I suddenly thought, I don't have my jacket, I don't have my wallet. And I was originally thinking, well, maybe I'll just wait until the morning and check on the bus, although we actually weren't going to see the bus because we were in Key West and we weren't going to get on the bus. So I thought Debbie had given us her telephone number and said, call if you've got any issues. So I called her and she was on it, got it sorted out, got hold of the driver. He knew it was on the bus because he'd sorted out the bus, cleaned the bus, and I had it back within sort of 10-15 minutes. It was all resolved. And I know that was a relatively small issue, but it was, for me, it was like, but I realized that the great thing about traveling on an escorted tour is you have a person whose contact number you have, and you can contact them. And David actually said any time of night and day, if there's an emergency or a problem, call her and she can sort it out. And so I think that's also peace of mind is probably another big plus, is that people know that they're away from home, and if they have problems or anything like that happens, they have someone there who will help sort it out. And I guess particularly if you're a solo traveler, that's even a bigger issue, knowing that you've got that support, etc. So I think that's a very big plus, and I can see why people would like come on an escorted tour for that reason alone. And also it was great because I got my problem resolved. So that's another big plus. So let me talk a little bit about Key West. I've already mentioned it was pouring with rain. It's been really sunny the day before, and looking at the weather, it's probably going to be very sunny the day after we leave. But of course it's warm in Key West, so it was fine. They called it liquid sunshine, and I think they quite like rains because it's not completely oppressive heat. Conch train it's a little carriage, and I discovered it was set. It looks like a little, I'm sure you've seen them in many places. So it's almost sort of like a little train. It looks like a train engine in the front, and then they have all the little carriages behind, and you all sit on it, and the driver gives an explanation. And apparently what had happened is this, the people who created the original conch train used to run the aquarium, and they kept getting asked about, is there tours, what are the tours? So in 1958 they set up the first conch train service, and now they have loads of, they sold it years and years ago, and they have a whole fleet of them literally that go around. And one of the things you see all around Key West are not only the conch train, but there are other competing, as they say, sometimes other brands are available. There are lots and lots of these little trucks going around because there are, I guess, there are some limitations around what can travel around the old town. So you have the new part of town, which used to be the old salt mines, which is where we're staying out. There's lots of the bigger hotels are out there, and then you have Old Town. And Old Town is where these little trucks and everything go around. The Old Town on Key West has been very much maintained, so you have all the old wooden buildings. It hasn't really been developed, and even if there are newer buildings, I guess because some of the older buildings get too decrepit or whatever, or ruined or whatever, and they're all built in that same style. So the whole Old Town is all this old architecture. And one of the things that did strike me though is quite a lot of it is obviously very beautifully restored, but quite a lot of it is also felt a bit run down and not that well cared for. So it seems a real mixture, and maybe it's hard to tell because perhaps in some parts of town, normally you're in a town, I guess you've got suburbs, and you might have a more affluent suburb or a poorer suburb or whatever. And I don't know whether actually in Key West, it just crossed my mind is that maybe that's not the issue. You don't have the suburbs because it's so small, so you might have people who have money, people who don't have money, whatever. And so you just have, and that's almost like house by house, depends on who's living in the house, whether it's in a state of disrepair or it's really well looked after. I don't know if that's true or not, but it just struck me that you had this whole sort of mishmash of, one house would be this very beautifully restored, great looking thing, then a couple of really run down places next to it, and then a great place and stuff like that. So anyway, so we toured around in the rain, and then we went off to Ernest Hemingway's house. Ernest Hemingway lived for, I think it was about 10 or more years, wrote many of his famous books in Key West, and his house is now a major part of the tourist circuit. It's one of the most popular, if not the most popular places to visit, and it was a very interesting tour, and we learned about his time there. I think it was his second wife that he was there. I discovered he had 4 wives in all. Originally what happened is they had got married, they'd been on their honeymoon apparently, and for some reason they got off in Key West, and they were going to buy a car to drive back. There was no cars available, and they had to wait 8 weeks or something for a car to come down to them. So he went fishing, fell in love with Key West, and his wife found this house which he fell in love with, which had been built by a man called Tift, who was one of the original salvage wreckers, and I'll talk about that in a second. It had been empty, I think, for a while, but run down. They renovated it, moved in, and he wrote many of his famous books there. And so around the house, obviously, some of their artifacts. There's lots of posters of some of the films that were eventually made of his books, etc. Very interesting tour. After that, then, as the rain had sort of died down, by then we had the rest of the day to ourselves. So it was probably about 11 or so by now. So what I then did is then went and explored and pretty much walked, huge parts of the town itself. Duval Street is the main street. That's pretty much where all the bars and the restaurants, much of the stuff is, but also wandering off that is quite important. I then also made a walk right down to the southernmost point, which is, sort of the official end of the United States, and they have the little symbol, I guess, if that's the right word. It's basically a concrete thing with that painted on, and there was people queuing up, a massive big long line of people queuing up to then be able to stand in front of it and have their picture taken. So that was quite entertaining, actually, watching that. And then I just strolled around the streets and saw various things, and went down. I went to the Mel Fisher Museum, which tells the whole story of how he had gone and spent years and years searching for treasure. There's a very beautiful art museum just near there, and I think it's the Custom House. And then behind that is the famous Mallory Square, which also strolled around on a cruise ship, a Royal Caribbean cruise ship was in. Now, Mallory Square is where people go to watch the sunset in the evening, and it's very party-like at night. So, and it's a big Key West institution going to Mallory Square for the sundown. And there's a couple of bars and things just around the corner from that. So did that and wandered around. Had a really great day in Key West. The thing with Key West that's interesting, I hadn't been to Key West for a very long time. I'm trying to remember how long ago it is. It's probably at least 20 years or more. And I can't really remember that much what it was like, but it did strike me as being very much clearly a sort of touristy, not quite a party place, but there's so many bars, or interesting enough, lots of bars with live music, and I think probably the cruise ships coming in sort of fuel that whole business. So lots of people milling around, walking up and down Duval Street, sort of with a beer in their hand or a margarita in their hand, strolling up and down, and the bars getting sort of progressively sort of rowdier during the day. So it's a mixture of this kind of very historic town becoming a little bit more rowdy, party. I'm guessing at night, and late into the night, it probably gets quite party, because there's a lot of tourists also come. So once the cruise ship leaves, I'm sure it carries on partying. And it's sort of it's become, in my mind, it's very quaint and whatever, but it's not. It's quite a party town, I think, and it's quite sort of vibrant and lots going on from a party perspective, because there's not actually a lot to see, because pretty much once you've been to the southernmost point and you've been to one or two of the sort of museum things, it's really about drinking and eating and having a good time, really. So that was Key West. Tomorrow we are heading off to the Everglades, which I'm really looking forward to, and doing some excursions to the Everglades. and then heading on to Cape Canaveral, where we will be spending 2 nights.
Today, folks, we are going to leave up through the Keys again. You have anybody, by the way, if anybody, I'm going to sit here, if anybody wants to sit next to me and take a few photos as we're going, just be careful coming along the walkway. Hold on and come and sit and take a few photographs. It's going to be a beautiful morning, so the scenery is going to be quite stunning, I think. So you're welcome to do that as long as you hold on. We plan to make a stop where we made a stop coming down here. Now, we'll carry on through Homestead up to the Everglades National Park, and that's where you have your boat ride and you see a show. Not for the faint-hearted. Oh, it's actually okay. It's just... But what my point is, they don't have much cafe space in the Everglades. Sometimes you arrive and it's busy, sometimes, and you've got nowhere to get your food, or it's a huge queue. So perhaps, just as an alternative, you might want to buy yourself a sandwich or something at the Winn-Dixies again. Yeah? It's up to yourselves, or you want to take a chance on the cafe. So the idea is you have the Everglades ride, and then you have the show, and then maybe have a little bit of lunch, and we'll be on our way to the hotel. Yes, it's quite a long way today. You know, it is. It's not down the road. So hopefully we make good time.
And so at 6 o'clock in the morning, the phone started ringing, and I sort of rather confusedly woken up, grabbed the phone, and it was a wake-up call. Apparently what the hotel had done is arranged wake-up calls for everybody at 6 o'clock, even though they hadn't been requested by Debbie. So there was a few grumbles, and poor old Debbie had to deal with that. But basically the hotel, in sort of well-meaning, decided to put in a wake-up call for everyone at 6 o'clock. We had to have our bags outside the room by 6:30 in the morning, so an early start. With a departure at 7:30, everyone was up and about because of the wake-up call, so probably it worked. We left at 7:30. We stopped at 9:30 very briefly till 10 to sort of at the Winn-Dixie again to sort of stock up with stuff for lunch. And then by 11:30 we arrived at the Everglades. So it was about a 4-hour drive up, through the Keys and then across into the Everglades National Park. And we arrived at 11:30 at the Everglades Safari Park, and we spent until just before 2 o'clock there, and we had the most fantastic experience. One of the things that I've never done is actually go through the Everglades on one of those airboats. Those airboats are basically, if you haven't seen it, imagine a sort of a very shallow boat with rows of seats on, and a massive big fan at the back, like an oversized air conditioning fan, one of those ones you sort of have on a stand. That's basically what it is. So instead of using motors that go below the water, it basically pushes air from behind. And the reason being that actually there can be very little amounts of water that they have to pass over, and also they're passing through areas with lots of reeds and plants and things. So if you had some sort of engine, motor below the water and rudders and things below the water, it would basically get caught up in everything, and I guess also damage wildlife that may be underneath there, like alligators, I guess, although I'm sure alligators would soon get out the way. But so basically we got on board one of the airboats. It was quite a big one. It held pretty much all of the party. I think it holds 40 altogether. There was a couple of people who went in a different one. And we went out for about a 30-minute ride. Now, we actually didn't really see many alligators, partly because apparently what's happened is there's been the water levels basically has risen quite a lot in the area. And what happened is because the water's been rising, the fish have been heading off wherever they head off, because I guess there's more water, they can get around about more. So the birds have gone and the alligators have kind of more dispersed. So we saw an alligator actually swimming around in the basin where we headed out. We saw one when we headed out, and then we saw another one a little bit later on. So we didn't get to see that many alligators when we were actually out, but the Everglades trip itself was fantastic on the airboat. You can zoom along really fast, and then you can go really quietly and slowly through other parts. And I've made a whole video tour of that experience, which you can take a look at again on the YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/tipsfortravelers, or just go to the website tipsfortravellers.com and search Everglades, and you'll find that video. So what we did once we got back is we then went and watched what they call the alligator show, where this guy comes out with a snake and tells you the story about the snake, lets people touch it, and then he goes into this pen where there were 3 alligators lying on the ground, lolling on the ground. There's one that's in the sort of water. And one of the things that did strike me a lot about alligators versus when I've been to crocodile farms is alligators seem much more placid than crocodiles. Crocodiles are very, aggressive, whereas alligators seem much more laid back. And I'm sure these ones have been around for a while and they know the trainer, but he basically came in, he was explaining alligators, explaining the way they live, explaining their teeth and their jaws and their skin and how they move, and they use their tail to propel through the water, etc., etc., etc. But basically he was sort of touching them, leaning on them, etc. And I've said etc. a lot there. And it was quite scary in a way, having seen when I've been to like Crocosaurus in Darwin, when the trainers won't go anywhere near the cages, and they won't even stand on ledges which the crocodiles can reach to, because crocodiles will leap up and grab them. So it was just really interesting seeing that difference between alligators and crocodiles. It was really interesting, learnt a lot there, and again you can see some of that on the video. We then just had the lunch that we had all bought, and then we headed off, as I said, about 1:45, just before 2, to head off up north along the coast, pretty much to the Western Cape Coral. The Western Cape Coral actually has a long name. It's called the Western Cape Coral Resort at Marina Village, is its full name. But basically we got here around about 5:15. So again, that was quite a long trip, about a 3-hour trip, although just over a 3-hour trip. So quite a lot of time was spent in the coach today. So that about the 4 hours before, another about 3 hours. So we spent about 7 hours in the coach altogether. Very interesting, though, driving through that whole Everglades park, because we then actually drove into the Big Cypress Preserve, as it's called. And we actually stopped at the visitor centre where they had like a canal, I suppose that's the right way of calling it, which had a couple of alligators swimming around. So that was great to see that in the visitor centre. They also showed a video all about the habitat and the flora, the fauna, and the wildlife in the Big Cypress, which is basically just next to the Everglades Park. But very, very interesting indeed. So we arrived at the Western Cape Coral Resort at Marina Village. Massive big complex and beautiful grounds, beautiful green grounds. It's right on a marina, as the name would suggest, with massive big yachts and boats and things in. It's a very nice hotel. It feels very, very upmarket indeed, and beautiful rooms, although the rooms all have interconnecting doors, which is my pet hate. But it's quite nice in here versus the other place we stayed at, because you have a separate bedroom and you can close the door. So if you do have people next door that are making a noise, you can actually at tonight when you're sleeping sort of shut that noise out much more, although I didn't hear any noise. I've been quite lucky on that front. The hotel itself is very beautiful. It feels very upmarket. As I said, it's a massive complex, but it's definitely been the nicest hotel of all the hotels that we've stayed at so far. But even looking at the price of residential accommodation, apartments and houses, it's not that expensive. So I'm guessing that this whole Cape Coral area is a relatively inexpensive place. So probably a resort like this is not massively expensive. So I don't know what the budget is for the hotels every night, but I guess it's heavily influenced by where they are. In places like Key West, there's huge demand, and so the hotel there was okay. It's probably the hotel that people liked the least. And I guess that's one of the things you don't really, if you come on a package holiday, that's one of the things you don't have. You don't have any influence or say on the hotels, because they're just part of that escorted, an escorted tour. It's part of the package. The hotels are all the hotels, and I guess they're all worked out within a budget and whatnot. So there has been a fairly big range of hotels, and that's probably not true. There's been a range of hotels, not probably fairly big, with the Westerns definitely being the most upmarket, the most luxurious. The place we stayed at on the first night, the Rose and Shingle Creek, was probably the next best down. Then there was the Grand Plaza, and then quite a way down below that probably was the Key West one, which did feel the DoubleTree, which felt much less sort of slick and upmarket. So we had a great time. And despite spending quite a lot of time on the coach with that really magnificent time in the Everglades, it didn't actually feel like a long time. And so we then had the next day, day 7, was actually spent as a day complete and utter leisure. So there was no specific excursions, no specific outings. It was a chance also for Carlos, the driver, to relax a bit, Debbie to relax a bit, although she was available between 9 and 10 in the lobby, and so that was great. And lots of people went to see her, and she sorted out, I guess, whatever she had needed to sort out for them. Included in the hotel fee was a trip across to Fort Myers and the beach at Fort Myers, which went at 10 o'clock, returned back. They left the beach at 2, got back here about 3 or so. I think a couple of people went on that. I decided to then just lie around the pool, which was very nice. They actually have 3 pools in the complex, but the one that's really associated with the hotel is literally by the hotel. The others are sort of more around the property where there's residential, but clearly people in the hotel can use those other pools. Sort of laid around the pool, had a very relaxing day, and just basically chilled, ready for heading off on the next part of the tour tomorrow. One of the things that I also did today was thinking through sort of the pros and cons, etc., of an escorted tour. And I found a couple of articles about the pros and cons of an escorted trip and reasons not to take an escorted trip. And pretty much some of the themes that I've said so far was reinforced by that, which had spoken those about the pros being everything's planned for you. You don't have to, worry about anything. All the bookings are made. You don't have to keep track of your schedule. You can fit in a lot because escorted tours tend to have a very packed itinerary. It's been planned by someone who knows the way around the destination, so they get the most amount of things in with the most amount of time. You've got the guide who keeps all the details, but also knows the destination and understands how the local customs and things work. And of course, not in our case, but if it was a foreign language, they speak the foreign language. They spoke about the budgeting and the price, that it's pretty much everything's included. As we know in this one, not the meals aren't, but you're very clear about what's included. Also, the point that they made there, which is also true, is you can also generally skip lines. Now, we haven't had many lines, but certainly they've got tickets in advance, and normally there's group entrances, so we don't have to stand in queue. And I think that's a point I hadn't really picked up on because we haven't been in places yet where there's been lots and lots of queues. The other point that they made, which I thought was interesting, is that if on the sort of escorted tour, because they have volume discounts and leverage, etc., because of what they're putting through, is it's probably cheaper than doing it yourself. So if you do the same itinerary as we've done, staying at the same hotels, seeing the same places, it would probably have cost you more. So that's something to think about. Plus, of course, the fact that you're in a tour group and you've got people looking out after you, which I've mentioned. In terms of not taking a escorted trip, some of the things I think I've referred to, of course, there's no flexibility. The hotels, the itinerary, the excursions are all pretty much fixed, so you can't do anything about them. They're there, and the only option is not to do them. But in many cases, you can't do that because the bus is moving off somewhere, and you're changing hotels, so no flexibility. They talk about being on a tight schedule, which can often mean early mornings, and although we haven't really had that other than the one morning, but limited time to explore on your own. I think this escort tour is actually given quite a good mix of, once we go to a place, giving us time to do it. But generally speaking, you can't, in the certain places, you can't then go off a lot and do things yourself. But I think we've been given quite a lot of time. Of course, they make the point that if you don't get on with the guide or the guide's rubbish, then you only know that after the tour begins. So you then suffer. That has been the case here. Debbie's been a fantastic and very knowledgeable and very efficient guide. But it's true, I guess, if the tour guide was average or you didn't really like them or like their style, the way they did things, you're stuck with them. And the other point they made, though, which I thought was an interesting one, which I hadn't thought of, was if you were a repeat visitor, so say you've been to Florida a couple of times, a guided tour, an escorted tour, is going to probably hit the highlights, the must-do things. So it's likely that you're not going to go to many new places because you've probably done those on your first round. So it's quite an interesting point that actually they're probably best suited to a place that you haven't been before. So I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of the pros and cons.
Okay, so I'm just going to tell you the order of the day. Is that okay? It's going to be baking hot, that's for sure. And we're heading for Clearwater, the final destination on the programme. And we're, 3 nights there, which is nice for you to be able to relax and chill out again, which is really what Florida's kind of all about. This morning we're heading to Edison and Ford Winter Estate. It's only about 30 minutes away. When we draw up, I just ask that you remain seated and I'll go in and get everything sorted. After that, we're going to spend about 2.5 hours here, and then we'll head off about 3/4 of an hour away to a little place called Punta Gorda, which is like a little pier, and it has little shops and little restaurants, and it's on the little water there, and it's quite pleasant. It's just for a lunch stop. Is that okay? It's very pleasant there, actually. And then we'll mooch along. From there, it's about 2.5 hours, but we'll go to the Sunway Bridge just to give you a photo opportunity of the fabulous bridge going over to Tampa there, joining the mainland, and then we'll go into the hotel where you're free for the rest of the evening. Does that grab you okay? So it's a nice, gentle kind of day.
And so today was spent travelling to Clearwater with a magnificent stop at the Edison and Ford estate. So basically what happened today was we had to have our cases out by 8, so relatively civilised. We departed at 9 o'clock, half an hour's drive. We were at the Edison and Ford estates, which are in Fort Myers, or just near Fort Myers. A beautiful complex. Basically, Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, who were great friends. Ford originally used to work for Edison at the Edison Light Company. He'd showed him his plans for the combustible engine car, and Edison encouraged him. So although there was 16 years age difference between them, became great friends, and Henry Ford always saw Thomas Edison as a great mentor, and so when an opportunity came to have a winter house next to his, he did. So Thomas Edison found this place, which at the time was extremely remote, and built this beautiful house, a house and a guest house, which eventually he ended up taking over both of them. He had laboratories there, he did lots of experiments, a major push to try and find an alternative, locally sourced rubber solution, so the US wasn't dependent on imports, all took place there. It's a beautiful, beautiful complex, magnificent gardens, gorgeous houses, and a great museum. And then you can do the same, so you can tour through it, you can look through all the windows and see how the furniture was and the house was set up, and you can do the same on the Ford side. You can go and look and see, basically, although the Ford side is more recreated because the house was actually owned by some other people before finally selling it to the city. So that's much more of a recreation of what it used to look like, whereas the Thomas Edison one, I think, is more of the original furniture as such. But it's absolutely fascinating. I didn't even know it existed before I came on this tour. And so I guess that's one of the opportunities that you do if you go on an escorted tour. They will have found sort of unusual things or things that you should see. I mean, I would never have known about that, I don't think. It was a great day. So we spent from 9:30 to 12:30 there. We set off and we had a lunch stop at a place which was called Punta Gorda, which is basically an excuse to stop for lunch. Lots of seafood restaurants, had some very nice seafood there. Stayed there until 2:30 and then headed off to the hotel. We just had a short stop for 15 minutes or so, and we arrived at the hotel about 4 o'clock. So today was probably less time on the coach. I think it was probably about 2.5, 3 hours on the coach altogether. And we arrived at Clearwater at the Sheraton Hotel, which is very much a resort hotel. It's got a really nice swimming pool, and then this massive stretch of white sand, but it's about 200 meters maybe before you get to the sea. And often if you read lots of reviews that people leave about the Sheraton in Clearwater, which is actually its official name is the Sheraton Sand Key Resort Clearwater. But lots of people talk about, it's such a long walk to the beach, which I'm not quite sure why that's such a big issue, but it's factual, I guess. But really nice beach. It's a very much a resort hotel. So, and we arrived on a Sunday, so there was lots of families, lots of kids there. I had a room overlooking the swimming pool, so you could sort of hear kids shrieking and playing around the swimming pool. And also during the day, it was quite family focused and lots of kids and stuff around the pool. However, if you then went down to the beach, it was much calmer and quiet. And you could also, if you wanted to rent chairs, 2 chairs and an umbrella for $25. The sea was gorgeous. The beach was magnificent. The hotel probably was a little bit too resort-like. What's interesting because it basically had a conference going on, so huge amounts of rooms taken up for conference, and then lots of families. It was very much a kind of a resort/conference hotel. So it's not the sort of place that I would choose to go to, a sort of on a relaxing couples hotel or something. But certainly a lot of people love the hotel. They really like the rooms and the pool and the beach and the location. There was a shuttle bus, a trolley bus, which you could pay $2 something per individual trip or $5 for a day pass, which called right at the hotel and then would take you basically into the main part of Clearwater, which is, basically a stretch of hotels and restaurants, very tourist focused, so very tourist kind of style restaurants and bars, and there's a pier there and all that kind of stuff. So that was quite handy to do. And again, so the hotel itself was quite far away from everything, but having the trolley bus was great. It probably took about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that. Then there was other buses that went much further afield from there, but the trolley bus was really handy and helpful. So we actually had 2 full days at Clearwater. I decided to actually just relax and spend time at the pool and on the beach and just catching up on things. So I didn't really do much. I did catch the trolley bus into town and have something to eat, but basically laid around. So the idea was, though, that for people who didn't want to laze around, there was going to be optional things laid on. So on the first day, there was a optional trip to Busch Gardens, which is about an hour or so away, which is sort of a theme park, roller coaster and gardens place. But nobody wanted to go to that. I think it probably was a bit too theme parky for the people on the trip. So no one went on that. So that didn't happen. That would have cost $99. And I think there was a minimum amount of people who had to go on it. So they didn't actually run that because no one was interested. On the second day in Clearwater, they did an optional thing where it wasn't charged for. It was really just something they laid on very kindly, which is take people to the premium outlet malls, which most of the group went. I think over 30 of the people went on that, and they spent a couple of hours at the mall, buying things and shopping and all that kind of stuff. Obviously these outlet malls are very popular in Florida. Everywhere we go, you see them. It's not something I decided to do. I much prefer to take advantage of the beach. Then that evening, or the second evening, which was the last evening of the trip, not counting the night back on the flight, we went on, which was included in the fare, a evening dinner cruise. So it was about 3 hours long. It left at 7 o'clock. We had to be there for 6:30 for boarding, and it got back just around about 10 o'clock. And basically what you had is it included a meal. So you had a salad, a starter. There's a huge choice of main courses. I actually chose a surf and turf, or I think they called it land and sea, which I think most people chose. And then there was a cheesecake for dessert. There was tea and coffee, and then your drinks were on top of that. So it was a large boat. The boat was called the Starlight Majesty. It left from just near Pier 60 in Clearwater. It didn't go very far, actually, just sort of toddled around the sort of the bay itself, watched the sun go down, and then came back. And it was quite good fun. I'm just looking at the actual brochure here. So the evening cruise, 3-course meal, service with salad, entree, and dessert. Leaves at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 6 o'clock on a Sunday. As I said, that was actually included. The drinks weren't included, but the actual cruise and the gratuities were included. So I'm just looking, if you were actually doing that yourself, it would cost about $25. So relatively inexpensive. It's a big boat. It holds about 200 people, and it was pretty full. So, there's us as a party of 40-odd, and then, all the other tables were full. So it's obviously a very popular and fun thing to do. And so that was the last night. And then on the final day, we then had to have our bags out by 10:30, and we left at 11:30.
Just ask you to remain seated while I go in and check where the check-in desk is. It's usually just inside the door, so you don't need a luggage trolley, and you don't, if it's a con, you never get your money back. Or you can, or you get a voucher or something for a coffee shop that you're not going to use. So it's just a question of just following me in. and it's just there. Now, they don't usually open until 3 hours before, and they're pretty strict on that one for some reason, unless they've decided to have another rethink about it. But just be patient. We're good at forming queues as Brits, so it's better to be there early than late, and especially with the security being as it is. But I have to say a formal goodbye. I hope you've really enjoyed yourselves, really I do. And on behalf of Titan and myself, wish you all a safe journey home. Now, when you arrive at the other end, I will be the last of the luggage belt to make sure you've all got your luggage. You will look for the Titan rep as you go through, bright red. You might have gone before I come through. This happens sometimes at that time in the morning. The drivers are there waiting for you, pretty handy to get you away. And I just say have a safe and pleasant journey, and maybe our paths might cross again.
So as I mentioned at the beginning of this whole live experience, was one of my objectives was to try and find out, more about what an escorted tour, what the pros, what the cons, who's it sorted for. And I think I got a really good perspective, and hopefully during the course of this podcast, I've given you a sense of that. What I have done, though, is also decided to do a full podcast about escorted tours and trying to get those thoughts together as a sort of a standalone podcast, and also article about what is an escorted tour, the main pros, the main cons, and who it's best suited for, and the sort of questions you should ask when choosing an escorted tour. So if you want to listen to that, just take a look for that podcast, or of course subscribe to the podcast. And the easiest way of doing that is to use one of my shortcodes I've set up. So if you want to use iTunes, it's tipsfortravelers.com/iTunes-TFT. And all these, remember that Travelers is spelled with 2 L's, the UK way. So iTunes is iTunes TFT, it's /Stitcher TFT, /TuneIn TFT, or /Google Play TFT. And there you can subscribe, and also what would be even better is leave a rating and a review. So hopefully you've enjoyed this Best of Florida Live podcast, and it's given you a sense of some of the great things to see in Florida, as well as getting a sense of what it's like to be on an escorted tour.